Tell me a bit about yourself. I know that you have had experiences to be living in Indonesia for some time.
So actually I was born and raised in the Netherlands, but it's true. So my father is from the Netherlands, but my mother is from Indonesia, from the Minahasa, where she was born.
So what would you say when we're looking into that? How do you describe the center of excellence of Hidayah?
The more traditional policing, military, security intelligence approaches are important, but it's not enough. If you really want to work also on the root causes of violent extremism, why are people radicalizing to become a violent extremist, you also need to look at that, to build longer lasting peace, stability and security around the globe. And what makes Hidayah Center of Excellence is that in both fields, in terms of research and analyzing, knowing but also try to understand. And to be very frank, for a Center of Excellence, you simply also need the latest insight, but also good people. People make the difference.
There is a big question when we're looking into the violent extremism. What are the global trends right now? I know, for example, the Secretary General has been talking about community empowerment. Yep. But now I think the Hidayah has changed its motto, looking into more of a community engagement, building that community resilience. So where are we at the moment?
Yeah, so indeed, as I said, when we look globally, of course, there's a more substantial concern at this very moment within a lot of countries with the growing support of and activities of radical right, far right or racially and ethically motivated violent extremism. Countries use different terms for the same group and networks. It is true that when you look at preventing and countering violent extremism, yes, the role of communities, community leaders, but obviously also of governments. It should be a collaboration, a constructive collaboration in which each in a way is given the possibilities and is empowered to do what they can do best. Because at the end of the day, let's not forget, we are all in a way fighting for the same thing. We all want to contribute to a more peaceful, stable, safe and secure environment for all our countries.
Salam Sobat Damai, saya Andika Krisnaidanto. Kebetulan kami sekarang sedang berada di Abu Dhabi dan kedatangan tamu kehormatan Bapak Ivo Venkamp. Beliau adalah Wakil Direktur Eksekutif dari Hidayah. Hidayah adalah suatu organisasi internasional yang dibentuk oleh Global Counterterrorism Forum dalam rangka untuk membentuk suatu Center of Excellence yang bersifat independen, netral, dan multilateral. Hidayah berfokus untuk meningkatkan pemahaman dan berbagi praktik baik untuk secara aktif membangun kapasitas aktor dalam penanggulangan ekstremisme berbasis kekerasan di seluruh dunia dalam mempromosikan toleransi, stabilitas, dan keamanan melalui dialog. Langsung saja kita pada wawancara kali ini di podcast Cafe Toleransi BNPT. Selamat malam Pak Ivo. Tell me a bit about yourself. I know that you have had experiences to be living in Indonesia for some time. And I also know that your grandmother is also from Indonesia, I believe?
My mother.
Your mother?
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a bit about yourself for our audience?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I was born and raised in the Netherlands, but it's true. So my father is from the Netherlands, but my mother is from Indonesia, from the Minahasa, where she was born. And then my parents met each other in university in Amsterdam when they were both studying political science, SOSPO. So I have a connection through my mother and her family, my grandparents from Minahasa and also Sangir dan Talaut islands with Indonesia. And as a coincidence, actually, my father was asked to coordinate a program in Yogyakarta with UGM, Universitas Gadjah Mada.
Oh, that's very nice.
To coordinate collaboration between three Dutch universities and UGM. So that was the time that, together with my sister, I actually spent 4 years in Yogyakarta. But this is a long time ago, so now you know a little bit about my age. This was actually 1978 until 1982. And after that, of course, when I was a student, I also traveled again to Indonesia, spent some time there, and after that, since I have a very special relationship with Indonesia, with the people of Indonesia, whenever there's an opportunity, either for holidays or for work, in support of the important work of BNPT. Of course, I'm very happy to come and visit Indonesia and to meet with the distinguished colleagues from BNPT, and in particular with Pa Andika and his team.
Ivo, thank you very much. I mean, that was something very wonderful, knowing that Pa Ivo himself was raised in Indonesia from 1978 to 1982. That was quite a long time ago. I think we're both at the same age. We are 17 years old and counting. Of course, looking into that, there are many experiences, as well as we can say you have fond memories of Indonesia. And I believe your work in the Hidayah has helped Indonesia as well. Some of the programs, we will talk about it later. But I think what we also need to know is this word saying that Hidayah as a center of excellence. So what would you say when we're looking into that? How do you describe the center of excellence of Hidayah?
Well, to start with, it's good to mention that when Hidayah was launched through the Global Counterterrorism Forum, the members of the Global Counterterrorism Forum, the countries, said that when you look at international countering terrorism, the more traditional policing, military, security intelligence approaches are important, but it's not enough. If you really want to work also on the root causes of violent extremism, why are people radicalizing to become a violent extremist? You also need to look at that, to build longer lasting peace, stability and security around the globe. So that's why Hidayah was launched as a think and do tank. So of course we need to implement, we need to do more to lower the threat. But it should also be based on an always better understanding of why people are vulnerable for radicalization, what is working and what is not working. So the combination is key. And what makes Hidayah Center of Excellence is that in both fields, in terms of research and analyzing, knowing, but also try to understand, not only information, but understanding, and translating that into programs, implementation, capacity building. As a Center of Excellence, we have to always make sure that we have access to the latest insights, that we also set the agenda. If there are new topics, new issues to be raised, that we will do so. And then we have to translate that into practical programs that are top level, and very importantly, that always take into account what is the local context of the countries that we are working in. We only work when a government of that country is fine with it. It's always in collaboration,
Right.
it's always in support. It's not only about what should be done, but also what can be done. You have to be realistic about your own resources. That goes for all countries around the globe. So the center of excellence is really that you are the best in your field, that you combine those things. And to be very frank, for a center of excellence, you simply also need the latest insight, but also good people. People make the difference.
Right. Thank you, Pak Ivo, and I do believe this is very important. Jadi Sobat Damai, seperti yang disampaikan oleh Pak Ivo, sebagai suatu center of excellence, dia harus yang terbaik, dan juga programnya memfokuskan pada upaya pencegahan. Jadi tidak cukup saja kalau kita bicara mengenai penanggulangan terorisme dilihat dari sisi hard approach, tapi juga harus dengan menggunakan soft approach. Hidayah sebagai suatu center of excellence memfokuskan pada upaya-upaya pencegahan, dan programnya Hidayah juga tentunya dapat dia kerjasamakan dengan berbagai negara yang memang membutuhkan bantuan dari Hidayah sendiri. Tentunya Pak Ivo, I think that is very important, looking at what are the main focus of Hidayah's program. I know there's a range of prevention efforts that Hidayah is providing, that excellent means for technical cooperation delivery. Now, what is the main focus of the programs in Hidayah?
Yeah, so we have identified 5 areas of special interest, our priorities, our areas of expertise. The first one is national action plans. Yeah. So upon request we can support governments, can be national governments, but also of course local governments, NGOs, in the development of their national action plan for CVE, or to support them on how to translate that national action plan into implementation. That's one thing. Because even the UN, the Secretary General of the UN, said if you want to work on prevention and also countering violent extremism, you need to have a comprehensive plan to identify the many things that need to be done, identify all the organizations that should play a role at the national level, at the local level, of course community, civil society organizations. I think Indonesia has now a very good national action plan. You did this yourself, of course with sometimes advice from others, but it was your national action plan. So I also want to congratulate Indonesia and BNPT on this success. That's one. The other topic is strategic communications. So this is supporting governments in developing a national communication strategy in support of national action plans. That's one thing. It's also about collecting and making available existing counter-narratives, alternative narratives. So the arguments, the examples that violent extremist groups are using, if you hear it, what is out there already that can be used to counter that. And most importantly, to provide an alternative. So if I'm angry about something, it's not good enough that somebody tells me what I am not allowed to do, but it's better to people say, if this is your concern, this is a more constructive, positive way to still work on that, but without, of course, killing people. And we do a lot in terms of supporting different society actors, governments, to become better in their social media communication efforts, their messaging. So we train people on that, so that's on the communication side. We also have provided training to journalists and spokespeople of government. Then an important topic is community engagement. So if you want to work on a whole of society approach for PCVE, of course you need the involvement of different people within your communities. The government cannot do it alone. So we have several programs to support and empower those people. Can be young people, youth leaders, women, of course the role of women and mothers is very important, community police officers, religious leaders. So all those people, either within an NGO or informal leaders, can play a constructive, positive role in preventing and countering violent extremism, but sometimes they need to be trained, we need to build their capacity. Then another important topic is education. Of course, to strengthen the resilience of young people, because most of the time violent extremists, they try to target young people. So through education you can try to work on making young people more resilient. Teach them how to themselves become good in analytical thinking, always look for several sources of information before you make up your mind, how to discuss things in a professional, respectful way, but you can still discuss it, things like that. And then the last topic, and that of course is nowadays a very important topic, is on rehabilitation and reintegration.
Right.
So what to do if people are convicted for a terrorist crime and they are in prison. At some point of time they have to be released from prison after they've finished their term. Then what to do? Maybe if you just release them and they go back, maybe they're still radicalized, maybe they still have the same old ideas, so they can still be a risk to your communities, to your country. So you have to work on rehabilitation and reintegration. Or, which is a major topic of concern nowadays, what if people return, let's say, from Syria and Iraq, where they might have supported Daesh, can be fighters, can also be family members, children. What if they return? And again, not just to help people, but because there might be a security concern. So to address that, it's good to work on the rehabilitation and reintegration of those people. Also because sometimes the communities and the families, they don't accept those people back. Yeah, they might feel ashamed, they're angry. And if those people return and again are rejected by the communities they come from, or the family members, they might become angry again.
Right.
And then they might again support violent extremist groups. Those are the five
focus of programs.
Ya.
Sobat Damai, kalau kita lihat memang ada 5 program utama tadi yang disampaikan oleh Pak Ivo tentang program kerja Hidayah. Memang kalau kita lihat juga sebetulnya sesuai dengan Undang-Undang Nomor 5 Tahun 2018 di mana difokuskan pada kesiapsiagaan nasional, kontraradikalisasi dan juga deradikalisasi. Jadi ada 5 utama. Dan juga Pak Ivo menyampaikan selamat kepada Indonesia yang sudah sekarang memiliki rencana aksi nasional dalam pencegahan dan penanggulangan ekstremisme berbasis kekerasan yang mengarah pada terorisme. Nah ini kan sudah lahir yang kita kenal Perpres nomor 7 tahun 2021. Tentunya itu adalah salah satu program dari Hidayah dalam mendorong negara-negara untuk membuat rencana aksi nasional, dan seperti Indonesia sudah memiliki. Now, a very good question on the National Action Plan. There are issues. We've had international issues related to the words violent extremism. Again, this is a terminology that is being used. Of course, there are a number of countries that do not agree with the use of violent extremism, but I believe it's becoming more general now and more generic. Can you tell me a bit the difference between radicalism and violent extremism? What is more dangerous and what is not dangerous? I mean, these are things that is very topical. It is an issue for Indonesia as well, looking into that. Some would say it might stigmatize to a certain extent certain religions, but again, let's look at these two words. What would you say about radicalism and violent extremism?
That's a very important question, but also a very difficult one. It is true, I mean, there's no formally agreed upon definition of all these things, but there are some working definitions. By the way, it's also good to highlight that we as Hidayah, we look at all forms of violent extremism. As an example, as of now and already for quite some time, we are also working on radical right or the far right extremism.
Yes.
Because it is indeed true, we should always be careful that we do not stigmatize certain communities, certain religions. I think terrorism and violent extremism, of course, is not related to specific religions. It is misused for ideological reasons by certain groups. So that is number one priority, to always keep that in mind. When it comes to violent extremism, I think the main thing is that when we talk about it, we talk about groups, individuals who think that they are allowed, and sometimes even they are obliged, to use violence to achieve political or ideological goals. And thereby you can have innocent victims simply to achieve a certain ideological or political goals. So that is what normally as a working condition is meant when people use the word violent extremism. Yeah. That's number one. The process in which a person step by step becomes a violent extremist or is supporting violent extremists, that process is called by many radicalization. Yeah. But that should not necessarily be confused with radicalism. Yeah. So radicalism that exists, of course, again, all over the world, that can also relate to certain groups or individuals who have, let's say, very strong ideas that are outside of the mainstream thinking at the time. But it's not necessarily related to promoting or using violence. And to be frank, sometimes you have people who have maybe radical ideas, but sometimes this can also be something that later on you say it was actually positive. So I would personally say it is indeed good where possible not to mix those two words. Because otherwise some people might say simply because I belong to a group and maybe I have an opinion that most people think is a little bit too radical, suddenly I'm looked at from counterterrorism perspective. And I think all efforts related to counterterrorism and countering violent extremism, of course we should always be careful not necessarily to stigmatize people. It should always be very respectful, and where necessary we also need to clarify things. Otherwise, even we might reinforce the narrative of certain violent extremist group who are telling people that the West or other people are basically always against them. So if we give the impression that simply because you belong to a certain group, only that simple fact means that you are perceived to be a threat, in a way you are reinforcing that narrative.
Thank you very much, Ivo, and I think that was very clear. Sobat Damai, kalau kita lihat yang disampaikan Ivo, sebetulnya antara radikalisme dan ekstremisme berbasis kekerasan, kalau kita lihat bahwa itu adalah suatu proses radikalisasi, tapi yang bahaya itu bukan proses radikalisasi menjadi radikal, tapi justru proses radikalisasi kemudian menjadi ekstremis yang berbasis kekerasan, di mana seorang individu ataupun kelompok kemudian melakukan berbagai aksi-aksi kekerasan, dan tentunya ini akan mengganggu keamanan dalam negeri kita. Nah, melihat itu semua, sepertinya again, Pak Ivo, there is a big question when we're looking into the violent extremism. What are the global trends right now? I know, for example, the Secretary General has been talking about community empowerment. Yeah. But now, I think the HEDA has changed its motto, looking into more of a community engagement, building that community resilience. So where are we at the moment? Are we looking into more of a community, building that community resilience in countering violent extremism or preventing violent extremism? And of course, you've mentioned the fact that certain issues such as ethnically, racially motivated terrorism is part of that, movement of violent extremism at the global level. So how do you see this?
Yeah, so indeed, as I said, when we look globally, of course, there's a more substantial concern at this very moment within a lot of countries with the growing support of and activities of radical right, far right, or racially and ethically motivated violent extremism. Countries use different terms for the same group and networks. That's one thing. And of course, this is mainly of a concern in, let's say, Western countries. At this very moment, I think also quite some people are trying to see what the recent developments in, let's say, Afghanistan actually mean. Yeah, but and then, it's a little bit too early to call yet. But of course, that was considered by some to be an important development that might have repercussions. And the other thing is, I think for us, the focus is still on the 5 main areas of expertise and priorities that I mentioned. It is true that when you look at preventing and countering violent extremism, yes, the role of communities, community leaders, but obviously also of governments. It should be a collaboration, a constructive collaboration in which each, in a way, is given the possibilities and is empowered to do what they can do best. Because at the end of the day, let's not forget, we are all, in a way, fighting for the same thing. We all want to contribute to a more peaceful, stable, safe and secure environment for all our countries. Yeah. So that's one of the things. Yes, there will always maybe be difference of opinions or even definitions, but I think, and that's why it's also an international effort, and that's also why international collaboration is important. Of course, respectful, yeah, always respecting the authority of the country, the people, and the government. But you need to also collaborate to learn from each other, to always try to further improve. So I think when I look at PCVE, still, but the focus indeed, communities is important, but also the other topics, as I said, reintegration, rehabilitation, what to do with trying to get people back to your own countries. All those are of a major concern. Because some people say if all those people who were under the control of Daesh in Syria and Iraq, if most of them stay in those countries, that might also cause serious problems and threats for the future.
Right.
Yeah.
But Ivo, I think you struck something very important, rehabilitation and reintegration. In Indonesia, we have the de-radicalization program. More or less, it focuses on rehabilitating and reintegrating those that are observed to have been influenced by violent extremism. Now, recently I note that Hidayah came up with this blueprint on for rehabilitation and reintegration. Can you tell me, in very briefly, what that would entail, having this sort of blueprint, and what can we do to promote this blueprint from Hidayah, bearing in mind that Hidayah is the center of excellence?
So basically what we published, I think December last year, is a document which describes a prototype of a rehabilitation and reintegration center, based on the advice and input and experience of expert practitioners from around the globe, to make sure we have a balanced understanding and approach. And it contains several chapters and guiding principles if a country is considering to set up or to improve a rehabilitation and reintegration center based on international understanding and good practices. These are the things that governments and other involved entities can consider when they are setting up a center or trying to improve it. We use the word guiding principles because, again, this can be taken as a starting point for governments, And then, of course, the government should see, well, this might be the international guiding principle, but for my country, for my people, for my situation, what actually is the best possible that I can do so that it will be a tailor-made approach. And this document is basically there because we wanted to share these insights and practical advice to all those who are working on this. And of course, if governments want to, we can also play a role in actually supporting them in setting up a center or improving a center or maybe building more centers. And the insights can also be used to develop or implement rehabilitation and reintegration programs.
Thank you Pak Ivo, and Sobat Damai, ini yang tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Ivo itu penting sekali dalam proses rehabilitasi dan integrasi. Hedaya baru saja mengeluarkan dokumen yang disebut sebagai Blueprint Rehabilitasi dan Reintegrasi, dan tentunya blueprint ini bisa juga dipakai oleh negara-negara seperti misalnya Indonesia. Nah, dalam hal ini berisikan berbagai guidelines, guiding principles di mana bisa digunakan. Tapi yang terpenting, kata Pak Ivo, adalah bahwa blueprint ini juga harus disesuaikan dengan konteks lokal. Jadi bagaimana di Indonesia, maka bisa kita gunakan juga di Indonesia sesuai dengan konteks lokal kita yang ada. Tentunya kita sudah lama berkolaborasi juga dengan Hedaya, and I think I'm going to ask the last question, which is looking into the fact that BNPT and Hedaya has been collaborating thus far. Since 2019, there's the so-called program, the Family Support Program. To note a few, it is a capacity building program targeting social workers and psychologists to improve their skills and knowledge on how to best support families whose members are vulnerable to or affected by radicalization, leading to violent extremism. Now, this is a very good issue. It does look into the area of rehabilitation as well. So, can you tell me about this program? I know it's running into a second phase. And do you see more of such programs that can be conducted in Indonesia? I know that the Indonesian social worker and psychologists working at the Ministry of Social Affairs are very happy with this program, and they have said and they provided inputs and feedbacks that it's very beneficial for them. So, Pak Ivo, do you have any comments on that?
Well, thank you for raising it. First of all, allow me to actually really express my gratitude to the government of Indonesia, and in particular to BNPT, because from the very beginning, BNPT has been very much supporting this program, and it was also further developed and implemented under the guidance. And in collaboration with BNPT, so we would not have been able to do what we have done without your support and your guidance. So that is number one. And basically, it's you already described it very well. Basically, what we are doing is through several training workshops, working with your social workers in Indonesia, how to further improve their knowledge, but also their skills. So it's always important that it's not only about what people know, but we also try to train them on their skills so that they can, practically speaking, become better in what they do. Those social workers and psychologists, frontline workers that are actually engaging with family members of people who were affected or convicted for terrorist crimes. Because we all know that, of course, family members can play a very important role in trying to protect and support vulnerable people, but they can also make it worse. So to focus also on family members is extremely important. We have done this now already for quite some time. We also trained, let's say, people in Indonesia who can then train more people in Indonesia. Train the trainer is that concept. To be frank, I'm happy to hear that the people we trained were happy with our training workshop. but as always, we also learned a lot from your social workers, from your frontline workers. It's always interaction. So we also became better from it. And yes, I mean, if there would still be a need and an opportunity and a possibility to actually do even more in support of this type of work, of course, Hedaya would be very much interested to do so. And the same is true for any of the efforts related to working on rehabilitation and reintegration, or anything that is of relevance for Indonesia, for your government, for BNPT. Please do consider, of course, Hedaya to be your partner. If there's anything in which we can support, we would be very much willing to do so. So basically, this is also to thank you for the excellent collaboration. And I want to comment BNPT and the government of Indonesia anyhow on the many different things that actually your government and BNPT already is doing when it comes to preventing and countering violent extremism. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Pak Ivo. I think this is at the end of the interview. It was very interesting, and I've been really enlightened by the fact that this is, looking into Hedaya. I've always been very proud of Hedaya, bearing in mind also that Indonesia is part of the steering group of Hedaya.
Yeah.
So again, thank you very much, Ivo. And of course, I will have to brief this in Bahasa. Sobat Damai, terima kasih telah menyaksikan podcast kali ini. Tentunya kita berterima kasih juga kepada Pak Ivo yang sudah meluangkan waktu untuk bicara di podcast Cafe Toleransi BNPT. Saya Andika.
Saya Ivo.
Salam damai.
Salam damai.
Salam Indonesia Satria.
Salam Indonesia Satria. Terima kasih banyak.